Perfect. Here's a deeper, more emotionally immersive version of 1. The sudden silence, the power of withdrawal. It happened on a Thursday. Maya was mid-laugh, typing a response to one of Daniel's usual teasing texts, when she noticed he'd left her on read. No reply. No emoji. No, haha, just silence. At first, she didn't flinch. Maybe he was busy. Maybe his phone died. Maybe, just maybe, he was playing it cool. After all, they had danced this dance before, that modern rhythm of pull and push. It was part of the flirtation, wasn't it? But as the hours crawled by, her mind began to itch. There was a subtle shift she couldn't quite name. Something in her gut told her this time wasn't like the others. Daniel, the man who had once messaged her good morning without fail and stayed up just to hear her sleepy voice at night, had gone dark. Completely. No call. No message. No post. Nothing. At first, she dismissed it with forced nonchalance, telling herself to stay cool, detached. He's probably just overwhelmed, she whispered into the mirror, dabbing on lipstick with hands that trembled ever so slightly. But inside her, a storm was brewing. By day 2, that silence turned sharp. A low hum of discomfort began vibrating beneath her skin. She scrolled through their old conversations, desperate to pinpoint the moment things shifted. Was it something she said? Did she come on too strong? Did she not come on strong enough? Had he met someone else? Her mind, once sharp and centered, now wandered in loops, rewinding scenes from their last date, analyzing the tone of his voice, the tightness of his hug. Every interaction was placed under a microscope. And yet, the more she searched for answers, the further away they seemed. What haunted her most wasn't the lack of communication, it was the lack of closure. Daniel had vanished without explanation, leaving behind a silence that screamed louder than any argument ever could. And that absence? It didn't feel like neglect. It felt like strategy, deliberate, designed, like the quiet before a chess move, like she was being studied. What Maya didn't realize yet was that the silence was not just a missing sound, it was a mirror, a reflection of her own unmet needs, her unspoken fears. And this was just the beginning, because in this silence, her mind wasn't resting. It was waking up. 2. The emotional spiral confusion and obsession. By the 4th day, Maya was no longer pretending to be okay. The mask of casual indifference she had worn so confidently had begun to crack, and underneath it, a storm of emotions surged like waves crashing against glass. Daniel's continued silence had evolved from an annoyance into a full-blown psychological torment. The absence was no longer just quiet. It was personal. It was intentional. And it was driving her mad. She didn't want to admit it, even to herself, but her days had begun revolving around her phone. Every buzz ignited a rush of hope. Every silence carved deeper into her chest. She'd stopped sleeping properly. Her appetite had faded into the background. Conversations with friends became half-hearted. Her mind split between their voices and the screen that refused to light up with his name. Her thoughts became invasive, cyclical, punishing. Was it something I said? Something I didn't say? Did I text too much? Too little? Did I open up too quickly? She went back through their messages, rereading them like sacred scripture, searching for the sin that triggered his withdrawal. Every joke was dissected. Every emoji analyzed like a clue in a crime scene. And then came the social media spiral. She checked his accounts obsessively, scanning for signs of life. A like here. A comment there. Proof that he wasn't dead, just silent with her. The realization stung like betrayal. He was active, just not with her. And that silence, once brushed off as mystery, now felt like rejection in its most subtle, sinister form. But the worst part wasn't the doubt in him. It was the doubt in herself. She, who once walked into rooms without needing to prove her worth, now found herself questioning everything. Her confidence, once radiant and effortless, felt paper thin. like it had only ever existed in the light of someone else's gaze. As the days blurred into each other, confusion gave way to obsession. She began scripting imaginary conversations, things she would say if he messaged, things she'd demand if he dared to return. She fantasized about confronting him, about being cold, distant, indifferent. But the truth was, if his name popped up on her screen right now, she knew she'd drop everything because she wasn't chasing Daniel anymore. She was chasing certainty. And certainty doesn't exist in silence. It grows only in communication. But Daniel wasn't speaking. And Maya? Maya was starting to unravel in the spaces between the words. 3. The deep dive, a journey into the female psyche. By week 2, the silence no longer felt like an absence. It felt like a confrontation. Maya wasn't just angry anymore. She wasn't even waiting, really. She was spiraling inward, pulled deeper and deeper into the caverns of her own mind. Daniel had stopped talking, yes, but now her thoughts were screaming. And for the first time in years, she couldn't run from them. The ache wasn't just about him anymore. His disappearance had acted as a trigger, a detonator, and now, beneath the rubble, she found something darker, older, unresolved. Childhood moments where affection was conditional. Relationships where love had to be earned. Times when silence was used not to soothe, but to punish. She began journaling again, desperate to understand why this one man's silence felt like the collapse of her entire self-worth. What was it about Daniel, his voice, his presence, the way he saw her, that made her feel enough? And now that he was gone, why did she feel so exposed? She Googled things she'd never considered before: anxious attachment, emotional abandonment, trauma bonding. The words felt clinical at first, until she read a passage that made her drop the phone. When you have unresolved attachment wounds, silence can feel like death. Not because you miss the person, but because you miss the version of you they made you feel like. That's when it hit her. She didn't just miss Daniel. She missed the mirror he had held up to her. A mirror that reflected someone desired, adored, worthy. Without that mirror, she didn't know what she saw anymore. And that was the real crisis, not his absence, but the void he left behind in her identity. Her dreams changed. She started having flashes of memories she hadn't touched in years, times she'd been ghosted before, left wondering, always trying to prove her value. It was like her mind was replaying every moment she'd ever been made to feel disposable, as if it were begging her to finally deal with them. The silence had become a teacher, and Maya, reluctantly, had become the student. She wasn't healed. Not yet. But something had shifted. For the first time since Daniel disappeared, she was no longer chasing him. She was chasing understanding of herself, of her patterns, of the why behind the pain. And maybe, just maybe, if she could face the real source of that ache, she wouldn't need Daniel to explain his silence, because she would finally have her own answers. 4. Daniel's secret struggle, revelations behind the silence. From the outside, Daniel's silence looked like indifference. But on the inside, it was chaos. Controlled chaos, but chaos nonetheless. He hadn't planned on going no contact. Not consciously, at least. It started with one moment, an ordinary evening, Maya's message glowing on his screen, when he felt something tighten in his chest. A quiet voice whispered, "Don't reply yet. You're not in the right headspace." So, he didn't. And then, he kept not replying. What had begun as hesitation slowly became a wall. Brick by brick, silence by silence. Daniel wasn't trying to play games. In fact, he hated games. But he had learned, through heartbreak, betrayal, and years of being emotionally stretched too thin, that when he felt himself losing control, pulling away was his only form of protection. And Maya. She was the first woman in a long time who had made him feel alive and terrified. Their connection was intoxicating. Her laughter lit something up in him. Her vulnerability, her strength, her intelligence, It all drew him in like a current he couldn't resist. But it also woke up something else. Fear. Fear of being seen. Fear of being needed. Fear of being responsible for someone else's heart when he hadn't even figured out how to hold his own. What Maya didn't know was that Daniel had spent years hiding his wounds behind charm and confidence. Abandonment had been part of his story too. So had betrayal. So had masks. He knew how to pretend. He knew how to perform. But with Maya, it felt different. Too real. Too raw. And real made him vulnerable. Vulnerable made him reactive. So, when things between them got too intense, too emotionally charged, he froze. Not out of cruelty, but out of survival. He convinced himself he was doing her a favor by stepping back. That maybe silence was better than slowly unraveling in front of her. That maybe disappearing would hurt less than disappointing her. But as the days passed, Daniel began to realize something unsettling. He missed her. Not just her presence, but the version of himself he saw when he was with her, open, present, whole. And now, in his attempt to avoid emotional exposure, he'd pushed away the one woman who'd made him feel safe enough to be seen. It was in this emotional stillness, this isolation he'd wrapped around himself like armor, that Daniel met someone new. She was different, gentle, detached. A breeze, not a storm. With her, there were no expectations, no depths to drown in, no mirrors. And that, Daniel told himself, was a relief. But at night, when the world went quiet, he still thought of Maya. Because silence, he was starting to learn, doesn't just protect you. It can haunt you too. Let's dive into topic 5. The shift from vulnerability to strategy. Something snapped inside Maya on day 15. Not in a destructive way, but in a clarifying one. The fog lifted, just enough. The constant checking, the compulsive analyzing, the ache of rejection, it all suddenly felt beneath her. Not because it didn't hurt, but because she finally saw it for what it was. A trap she had been building for herself. She stood in front of her mirror that morning, messy bun, tired eyes, silence still echoing from her phone, and whispered, "No more." And just like that, vulnerability gave way to something sharper, something colder. Not bitterness, exactly, but strategy. Daniel might have gone silent, but Maya had decided she wouldn't. Not anymore. If he wanted space, she'd give him silence louder than his own. But this time, it wouldn't come from confusion. It would come from control, from choice. Maya didn't send a message, didn't post a sad quote. No, just checking in bait. Instead, she curated her presence with surgical precision. Her stories showed her smiling again, real or not. Her captions grew cryptic, layered. She began reappearing in places he might stumble upon her, mutual friends' feeds, niche hangouts, curated coincidences. It wasn't desperation. It was theater. And she was the director now. Her friends noticed the change too. "She's glowing," one whispered at brunch. "She's dangerous," another smirked. But Maya wasn't out for revenge. Not really. She was reclaiming her power the only way she knew how, by becoming a mystery again. The kind that lingers. The kind that haunts. She stopped asking why Daniel disappeared and started wondering what would happen when he realized she had too. That's when she began setting the traps. She dropped subtle breadcrumbs, an inside joke here, a song lyric there. Just enough to poke at his memory. Just enough to whisper, "I still exist, but I'm not waiting." And that's what made it dangerous. Because Maya had always been reactive before, emotional, raw, unfiltered. But now, she was composed, calculated, unreadable. This wasn't the girl who stared at her phone for hours. This was the woman who had turned her pain into posture. And while Daniel had withdrawn to avoid being exposed, Maya had embraced the exposure and weaponized it. She had turned heartbreak into art, longing into leverage, vulnerability into vision. And though her voice remained silent, her energy screamed, "You may have gone quiet, but now, so have I, and I do it better." Let me know when you're ready for topic 6, because the game is about to flip, and someone's about to break their silence, but not in the way you think. 6. The reversal, when the ghost gets haunted. Daniel didn't notice it at first. It was subtle, like a song fading out in the background. Maya's digital trail, once so vivid in his world, began to dim. No more playful posts. No more mutual friend tags. No signs of her watching his stories. No indirect shout-outs. No lingering echoes. It was as if she had turned the mirror around. And for the first time since he disappeared, Daniel started to notice the silence too. At first, he told himself it was relief. After all, wasn't this what he wanted? Space? Control? Freedom from emotional pressure? But something was off. The girl who used to orbit his world had disappeared from it entirely, and not in desperation, but with deliberate grace. He scrolled through her feed one night and realized it wasn't curated for him anymore. Her smile didn't look like it was hiding pain. It looked unbothered, distant, free. The pit in his stomach grew. He started testing the waters, liking an old post, reacting to a story. But she didn't bite. No message. No reaction. Not even a passive-aggressive meme. She didn't take the bait. And that silence? It didn't feel like punishment anymore. It felt like indifference. That's when Daniel felt a shift. A creeping, burning realization that maybe he hadn't been in control this whole time. Maybe the silence he used to assert power had turned into a prison. Because the truth was, Maya had occupied space in his mind too. Not loudly, but consistently. He remembered the way she laughed when she was nervous, the way she saw through him when he tried to dodge real feelings. Her presence had once been overwhelming, yes, but now her absence was unbearable. He began crafting a message, short, casual, like nothing had happened. "Hey, been thinking about you. Hope you're good." But he never hit send, because something inside him knew this time the silence had consequences. This wasn't a Cold War. It was a funeral, and he wasn't sure he was the one delivering the eulogy. Worse yet, he'd started hearing rumors. Maya was seeing someone. Or maybe not. No one knew for sure. But the possibility alone sent a slow panic trickling through him. Not because she was moving on, but because she was doing it without telling him. She had learned to ghost the ghoster. But not out of cruelty, out of closure. And now Daniel was the one haunted, not by her presence, but by her evolution. Because when he finally turned around to reach for her, he realized she wasn't standing where he left her. Let me know when you're ready for the final topic. 7. The resolution silence as self-reclamation, the climax of the entire story. It's time for that last emotional twist. 7. The resolution silence as self-reclamation. Silence, once a weapon of war, had become something sacred. It was no longer about power or punishment. Not for Maya. Not anymore. She had stopped waiting for Daniel's message. Not out of pride, but because she no longer needed it to validate her worth. Her growth hadn't been loud. It had been quiet, intentional. It happened between journal entries and therapy sessions, in solo walks and hard conversations with herself. She had stared down the roots of her need for approval and pulled them out one by one. She hadn't just survived his silence. She had outgrown it. One night, she saw his name flash across her phone, finally. A message. Simple. Safe. A digital hand reaching through time. "Hey, I've been thinking about you. Can we talk?" She stared at it for a long moment. And in that pause, something incredible happened. She felt nothing. No rush of butterflies. No anxiety. No craving. Just peace. A sense of done. Because what Daniel didn't know was that she had already had the conversation he wanted with herself. She had already asked the questions, wrestled with the silence, sat with the shame, and healed through it. Alone. Daniel, on the other hand, had stayed behind in his own emotional purgatory, afraid to speak, afraid to feel. He wasn't a villain, just unfinished. But Maya? She was no longer waiting for him to catch up. She didn't reply. Not that day. Not the next. Not out of spite. Out of self-respect. Because true healing, she had learned, doesn't demand explanations. It doesn't beg for apologies. It doesn't need closure from someone else when you've already given it to yourself. Her silence, this time, wasn't empty. It was full. Full of lessons, of growth, of new beginnings. Somewhere in a different part of the city, Daniel sat staring at his unsent follow-up message, realizing, far too late, that ghosting someone doesn't stop time. It only freezes you in it. And as Maya stepped into her next chapter, her story wasn't about being chased or chosen anymore. It was about reclaiming the one thing she'd always needed and finally gave herself. Peace. That's the full emotional arc. If you'd like, I can now turn this into a script-ready version for a voiceover or YouTube video with proper pacing, hook, narration style, etc. Just say the word.